So here's let's go back to our language 3, I think it was, where we have S at the end of a word and S before A, or should before I. And so we need a rule. Where's Camille's rule? This is the rule, right? That was what we ended up with. S goes to should before I. And yeah. And then in the other language, we also had S goes to should before I. But here we happen to also have underlying shoulds. Right? So in one pattern, the only source of should, in the previous language, the only source of should, let's say, I can't show you the absence of things, but let's say this is representative data. The only shoulds are from S's that became should before I. But in the other pattern, in the neutralization pattern, there's underlying shoulds as well. So what's the difference between the languages? There's no difference between these two languages. They both have a rule. S goes to should before I. So where does that difference reside? In language 3, right? We had loose and Lucy and Lusa. You actually know the right answer. I'm just trying to get you to keep clear. Keep going. So in this language, no. So where did this should come from? In this language, this is language 3. Why do we have a should here?
Because the S changed.
Right. So what's the underlying form of this word?
L-U-S-I.
Right, and then it ended up like that. Okay? And in the other language, we had Lushi, and so we had Lush and Lushi. I mean, you know exactly what's going on. And we have Lus and Lushi. And why is this Lushi? Why is this Lushi like this? So this is whatever dog. Why is this Lushi? What's the underlying form from language 1? So we have Lushi, Lush, Lushi, Loose, Lushi.
Oh, it's the same rule, but
Yeah, but it's the same rule, but there's no rule here, right? It's Lush, Lushi. So why is this a Lushi?
because it's like like because you add the I.
Yeah, and what about the L? Where did the L come from?
The dog.
The root that means dog starts with an L. And where did the U come from?
The same thing.
And where did the should come from?
The root.
Exactly. And the E is the E, right? So we have that. But why is this Lushi here?
Because you have to follow the rule.
Well, not because you had to follow the rule. You have to follow the rule everywhere. But why is there a Lushi here? What's it start at? Why is there an L there? Why does it have an L?
Because it's part of the root.
Yeah, it's an L. And why does it have an U?
Because it's the root.
And why does it have what's next?
Then you have to change the S to the
Well, you don't have to, you always have to change S to should, but it just has an S.
yeah.
Right? By our neutralization reasoning, it has an S. Okay? And then there's the rule. But it's not because you always have to follow the rule. Right? You can't put an S here because we know that it's not an S. But here you can put an S, and you have to put an S because you know it has to be S, right? So this one gets turned into a should. So now, both languages have the rule, which I've destroyed here, but S becomes should before I. What's the difference between, so we call this a neutralization rule, we call this an allophone rule. Where does that difference reside?
Paradigm.
What?
In the paradigm? Well, you're making
Well,
it.
no, the paradigm is just a list of words. We made all kinds of, look, this paradigm, we could probably add to this, right? We could get Lusha in this language, and we could get Lusa in this language, right? The paradigm might have combinations. The paradigm is just the surface forms, and we figure out what's in the grammar. And we figured out that this is in the grammar, this rule. And what else did we posit? When we make an analysis, when you do your nice, beautiful analyses, you list two things. You list your rules, and you list what else?
Alternate.
Your alternates are part of your steps towards figuring out what's in the grammar. What do you use your alternates for?
Lexicon.
The lexicon, right. So where's the difference reside between a neutralization rule and an allophone rule? Can you tell by looking at the rule?
No.
No, because this is the same rule for both languages. So what's the difference between an allophone rule and a neutralization rule? Where does it reside?
A lexicon.
Exactly. It's a fact about the lexicon that the language has. If it has should, I mean, that's basically what Jesse was saying, right? If it has should underlyingly, and it might, and it also has a rule S to sh, then it's a neutralization rule. If it doesn't have sh underlyingly, and it has S to sh, then it's an allophone. Okay? So it's a fact about allophones. There's nothing special about this rule. It's just a fact about what happens to be in the lexicon. We give it a different name, but there's nothing new going on. That's the end. As rules, they're the same thing. Okay? So again, we can get yet another kind of pattern. Okay? So we get lots of superficial variety from our simple model. Which is good. That's what we want. We don't want a really complicated model to account for the patterns in the world. Okay? So the term allophone, we're not going to really use that term, but it's a traditional term, so we should talk about it. Traditionally, there are surface forms that come from an underlying segment that are there because of the application of a rule, or else they're the default form. And traditionally, they're said they have to come from a single segment. So, let's see. In this language, where we have this, we have our, what do we call it, our split. We have S splits into S and sh. Okay? And these are allophones of S. So typically we write them like different brackets. I don't really care about the brackets. But in the neutralization case, where you have S and sh, S and sh, and you have this, sh is not an allophone of S. Sh can sometimes come from S. It can be a surface form that corresponds to S, but it's not called an allophone. Some people call it one, some people don't, but we're not. Traditionally, it's not called an allophone. So you have S and Z in English, and we know that, like in words like cats, right? Or versus dogs. Dogs has a Z and cats has an S. But there's a rule that makes the Z become an S after a T. Is S an allophone of Z? So Z can become S, but notice that there are S's, right? There's S's in words like sink versus zinc, right? There are minimal pairs. There's underlying S's and there's underlying Z's. So it's not the case that all the S's come from Z's, only some of them. So they're not allophones. So remember this Korean data? We looked at this? Yeah? Okay. And remember that if we ask them to say all these words, they all come out the same. But if we put them with a case ending, with an ending, they come out different. And so we said, so there's we use this example for a massive neutralization. All these different underlying segments end up coming out, so we've got, I'm just going to number them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They all come out as unreleased T, okay? So is this thing an allophone of S? Is this an allophone of S? The answer is, but traditionally it's not called an allophone because here's the definition that I used. That it's something that it comes from surface forms because of the application of rule, or it's the default, but it has to correspond to a single underlying segment. This corresponds to 5 different underlying segments. Okay, so traditionally, it's not called an allophone. Part of the reason this is confusing is that the traditional notion is incoherent. And we're being coherent. We're just saying, we don't care about the name allophone. We just know that there's rules, like S becomes should before I. I don't care what's in the lexicon. I don't care how many segments you come from. All we care about is that segments can change to other segments in some way. Okay, so we don't use phonemes either, right? So phonemes in the traditional term are segments that are present in the lexicon, and phonemes can distinguish meaning, and you get minimal pairs. The grammar doesn't care about any of this, right? The grammar doesn't care that night and night have the same phonemes or have the same or pronounce the same. Grammars have homophonous forms. Sometimes the grammar creates homophonous forms, right? If we get Lucy and Lucy from 2 different inputs, as Camille just showed us, the grammar made homophonous forms. La-di-da, right? Who cares? Grammar doesn't care about distinguishing meaning. So whenever somebody tries to explain something in linguistics in terms of, oh, but it's about distinguishing meaning, you know they're on the wrong track. Because They're trying to appeal to the fact that we use language to communicate, the function of language for communication. That usually means you're on the wrong track. Okay? The grammar doesn't care. The phonemes are traditionally defined as being able to distinguish meaning. Okay? So phonemes can map to several allophones, and it's just an arbitrary stipulation that allophones have to correspond to a single underlying phoneme. And once asked Morris Halle, the guy who got Chomsky his job, why did they put this arbitrary stipulation on there? And his only response was, they weren't very bright, but they must have had other reasons. But I think it just confuses things to have these definitions rather than think about it in terms of mappings of segments to other segments. All right, so yeah, so what I want to say is allophone's not a useful term, just function on what's in the lexicon and how it comes out. So here's a picture where we have, think of the orange as a set of environments, the ones that you happen to be interested in. And we've got some S's and some shoulds. And basically this is a case where in this environment, let's call this A, which is before I, you only get should. And everywhere else, in all the environments that you care about, everywhere else, you get S. Okay? And so if this is a big set of environments, the whole rectangle, it's a big set of environments, and you've got some subset of those where you get should, right? So we've got our set of all the environments. Let's call it V for the universal set, right? V for universal, okay? Or universal, I should say, universal. And then we've got A, which is some subset of the universal set. So what I've done is I said take V and get rid of the ones that are in environment A. What do we get? We get A prime or A bar. So what do we call that in set theory terms? What do we call the universal set minus some subset, some other set? Remember, you had a quiz on this, I think. What was the word? What? Complement. The complement. Yes. The complement set, right? So we have a set X, and we had, I don't know, how did we do it? That way or this way? This way? What? Prime?
Yeah.
Okay. And we call that the complement of X, right? So if we, I keep forgetting which one of these actually works, right? So if we have a set X, how many times am I going to do this? There we go. We have a set X, and we take it away from the universal set, we get the complement of X, which just means everything except X. And lo and behold, that's where that word comes from. Complementary distribution. You know that term, right? It relates to the set theory notion of complement. It just says if you take where you get something, where you get should, and you subtract it from where you get either S or should, then this is where you get S. Right? So together, so if we take this set of environments and we union it with this set of environments, what do we get? The universal set. Right? So complementary distribution, the word is related to complete, right? To complete the set of all possible environments. Right? It means that these two, the everything except the whatever this is, magenta, and the magenta complete the set of all possibilities. Okay? So this corresponds to what we call allophones. Right? So that was what it was language 3, the allophone case. Where sh occurs only here, and s occurs everywhere else. Notice everywhere else that we care about, right? Like it might be in the language if you take between a K and a P, neither one can occur. Right? So it's the set of environments that we care about. Okay? So in real life, we get something more like this. Like you might have sh occurs here, and s occurs everywhere else, except there's some accidental gaps where you don't get either one. For some reason, there's no lexical items that have between a P and a Q or whatever, there's no S's. There's going to be accidental gaps, right? You don't have to definitely have everywhere S's. Actually, kind of important, coming back to our point about what the observations are. Right? You might think, okay, science should be about generalizations, but it should be as detailed as possible. Right? It should capture all the facts. But in some sense, a grammar that accounted for this would be kind of, let's say for some reason there's no S's before O. Let's say that's this environment. Okay? Because they got lost 1,000 years ago. There happens to be a gap here. You neither get S nor show. Okay? So you might say, let's be as thorough as possible, and we can say where show occurs and where S occurs, and then there's this environment where neither one occurs, but in a sense you're doing a worse job by describing this. Because there's nothing, you don't need the grammar to describe this. The grammar says there's underlying S's, they turn into should here, and this is just an accident that's not encoded in the speaker's grammar at all. So just because you give more detail, and it's kind of weird, right? We think whoever captures the facts more thoroughly has the better theory. But the idea is that this is not a linguistic fact. It's not a grammatical fact. It's a fact about the data that happens to be true, but not for any interesting reason. All right? And then the idea is that here, even though there's this accidental gap, I'm kind of telling you it's an accidental gap, but the same generalization, the same rules, it says, well, S occurs everywhere else, but really the fact that S occurs everywhere else doesn't get encoded in the grammar, right? The only thing the grammar has to do is says, if I find an S before an E, I turn it into a should. The fact that there's no S's before O's just doesn't get encoded at all. Right? You just have to encode the rules. You don't have to encode the non-rules. All right, so if we want to use the traditional name allophony, then you basically have to have no underlying shoulds. Okay? But the rule here doesn't care if there's the rule is just a rule. It says S goes to should before I. It does what a traditional allophone rule is this case where there's no underlying shoulds, but from the perspective of what grammars have in them, that doesn't matter. It doesn't play a role. What's in the lexicon, rule X some rule doesn't care about what else is in the lexicon. Okay? And neutralization looks like that. So this is a really nice diagram. Right? Here's our universal set. And this is just where there's no relationship between the two. But again, more realistically, there's some accidental gaps for S, there's some accidental gaps for should. So English has, what's the status of S and should in English? Are they allophones or separate homonyms, to use traditional terminology? What are they? Are there any minimal pairs? How is that so? It was so? If you go to a play and I say, how was the so? And you could say, it was so. Or if I could say, how was the show? And you say, oh, it was show. Does it matter? Can you think of a minimal pair? Yeah, how about a minimal pair? I'll give you half of it. Show. What's the other half? Good. Right? So is a word and show is a word. That's a minimal pair. Yes? Okay, yeah. Good. Give me another one, since that was fun, it was challenging. Give me one at the end of the word.
Lease.
There you go. Lease and leash. Lease and leash. Very good. Good. See how much fun it is? Minimal pairs. But actually in English, you get something more like this, because notice you can have words like, what's the first one say? S occurs here. Okay. All right. We're going to take some dialects of English that ignores recent borrowings, but should actually. Okay. So before L, let's say the beginning of the word before L, you can get S as in. You're on a roll. Here we go.
Sorry? After the minimal pair?
Is that an energy drink? Yeah, you better keep talking or you're going to start bouncing around. Okay. Now just give me a word where you can have S at the beginning followed by L.
Soul?
No, S directly followed by L.
Slow.
Slow. Good. So you get S here. Now give me one where you can have should.
followed by L?
Yeah. Only if you're from, if you're from the East Coast, no. If you have a dialect that's influenced by Yiddish borrowings or German, and you can say things like schlep or schlemiel or schlump, so you don't have these.
Oh, I guess I know schlump, but I would never say
Schlump,
it.
okay, you never say. So it's not in your dialect. Good. So we're going to use Camille's dialect, and so there's no sh's so I'm just going to put this like a star sh. Okay, so S can occur here. Okay, and how about this environment? At the beginning of a word before R.
An S.
With the sh. How about the sh?
Shrimp, yeah.
Shrimp, yeah. Shrimp, and now with an S.
With S,
Yeah, if you say Sri Lanka, some people say Sri Lanka, and what's the hot sauce called? Sriracha, yeah. But unless, most people probably say, what is
Sriracha.
Sriracha. Is it SR?
Yes, SR.
Yeah, you're all saying sriracha.
It's
But it's sriracha or something, yeah. Okay. So in other words, you don't get any S before R, and you don't get any sh before L. Unless you have a dialect that says, I went to Sri Lanka and I schlepped my bags all the way there, or something like that. But, okay? So that's what these two regions are here. You get S, but you don't get L. Sorry, you don't get S, but you don't get sh before L. And you get sh, but you don't get S before R. That's true about English, let's say, at least Camille's dialect. But there's no rule related. There's no S to sh rule. There's no sh to S rule. So those are accidental gaps. Okay? So the grammar doesn't need to account for it. We don't need rules for those. So in a sense, if you make a grammar that accounts for this, you're doing work that you shouldn't be doing. It's not encoded. It's just a fact about the lexicon, basically. Okay, let's just look at the diagram for neutralization. Here's the environment where only S occurs, only sh occurs. Right, so this is your neutralization rule. And what do we get here? In the complement of this, we get both. Right? So we have one environment where only one occurs. In the complement environment, we can get S and sh. This is in English, right? This is the language. This is what language 1, normal neutralization. S becomes sh here, but we get lushy. But word finally, we can get loose or loosh. Okay, so that's the diagram for that. Okay, so what does complementary distribution mean? How did we talk about it last time? So if we say, but just more spirit, just looking at the words, right? What does complementary relate to?
complement.
Yeah, complement and ultimately complete, right? So you got the distributions together complete the set of all possible distributions, right? So if we've got all the possible ones, we've got, say, something that occurs here. Let's call this set A. Let's call this V for the universal set. And then everything out here is the complement, the set complement, right? So V minus A equals the complement of A. What are some sounds that are complementary distribution in English? So E and I in complementary distribution. If I look at beat and bit, I see that they mean two different things, and we see that E and I can occur in the same environment. This is called a minimal pair. And so are E and I in complementary distribution or not? No, they overlap in their distribution, right? They can occur in the same environment. Right? Is this familiar? Is this too easy? Am I going too slow? Too easy? So if you have it with aspirated and plain P, what are the plain and aspirated P? The voiceless bilingual stops. What else can you have it with?
The T.
Yeah, right? So you can have tie and sty. Right? You have seen this before, yeah? Okay, so before, at the beginning of a stressed syllable, you get aspiration. If it's not at the beginning, if there's an S before it, you don't get aspiration.